Wonderful. I'm going to share my screen again. Wonderful. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started here? So thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. We're very excited to be doing this. This is the first of a couple of different events we have planned over the rest of the year to talk about different human rights mechanisms and how people who use drugs can get involved. And today we're going to be talking about the Universal Periodic Review. And I hope that by the end of this, everyone has a clear understanding of, first off, what the UPR is, and hopefully feel encouraged and excited about getting involved when your country is next up for a review cycle. So my name is Jake Agliata, for those of you who don't know me, and I am the Policy and Communications Officer with the International Network of People Who Use Drugs, INPUD. And I'm very excited to be moderating the webinar today. We have a great lineup of speakers who I'm going to be introducing in a second. And first, I just want to go over a couple of ground rules and help everyone access interpretation who is going to be able to. So if anyone is unaware of how to access interpretation via Zoom, these are the instructions to do so. We have interpretation available in Russian, French, and Hindi. All you need to do is go to the webinar controls at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click interpretation. Click on the language you'd like to hear. Mute the original audio so you don't hear the original speaker speaking in English. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So please write a message in the chat to me or also preferably to Kim Jackson, who is handling logistics on our side, if there's anything wrong with the interpretation you can't hear. But hopefully we have that all sorted out for everyone. A couple of just general ground rules to go over. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation and keep your cameras off so we don't have any audio or visual interference with our speakers. As you may have just heard me mention a moment ago, the meeting is being recorded. And if you have any objections to being recorded, please let us know and we will remove any mention or appearance of you in the recording should there be when it finally gets finished. Please use the chat box function to ask any questions in the chat during presentations. We will be having a hopefully lengthy Q&A section. If there are enough questions submitted within the first two speakers, we'll take a quick break in the middle of the agenda to answer some of those questions. If not, then we'll just address all questions at the end of the webinar. But you can please submit them in the chat box beforehand so they're fresh in your mind. And we'll also give people the opportunity at the end to unmute themselves and ask questions directly if you have them then as well. And then finally, we also want to be able to take a group photo of all participants at the end of the meeting. If you would like to be a part of that, we will be thrilled if you would stick around and just turn your cameras on to that so I can take a quick screenshot of everyone's smiling faces. So that's pretty much all that we need to go over. Before I get into the agenda, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I can be sure to address them on the ground rules or interpretation. So after I finish my whole spiel here, I'm going to be handing it over to our speakers list. And like I said, I'm very excited to have such a great lineup of speakers from the community and also from civil society and from the UN itself. And we're going to be hearing from Zaved and Mohammed first to begin, who will be speaking directly on what the UPR is and some of the technical aspects of civil society engagement with the UPR, as well as the importance of civil society engagement in these mechanisms more generally. And then we're going to be turning it over to Vishnu Sharma from Recovering Nepal, who is going to talk about his experience submitting a UPR shadow report a couple of years ago. And then finally, we're going to end with Ajeng Arasati from Harm Reduction International, who's going to be talking about some of her past experience engaging with UPR and give some recommendations for planning a submission. So with that all being said and done, I think I will go ahead and just hand over to our first speaker, Zavek Makmoon. Zaved has been working at the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights in Geneva since 2008, and he is currently the OHCHR advisor on drug policy and human rights, and also advises on detention and torture. So Zaved, whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you very much, Jack. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I think that all over the places our colleagues and friends join. So welcome to this event. Just in next few minutes, I will not take too long, just I will take 2-3 minutes to introduce some issues which is relevant, particularly that just participation of civil society organization and the community, affected community, including people who use drugs, into at the UN system, it has been recognized and very much in different forums. If we look at the Angus outcome document on 2016, it clearly recognized that civil society participation is very important for designing, implementing, and monitoring drug policy related programs and activities. In this context also, High Commissioner for Human Rights issued a report in 2018. In that report, she also highlighted the importance of civil society. But also we are very concerned that some spaces, some countries or some regions, the shrinking space of the civil societies, shrinking civic space. And in this context, how we can support the civil society organization into the drug policy discussion is very important. And we are very much concerned that all this intimidation, threat, or harassment, whatever, just coming to our civil society who are engaging on the drug policy related issues, we need to address this issue, and I'm sure that my colleague Mohammed will address in the context also, in the context of Uppr. Last point I would like to mention and bring to your attention that UN system common position on drug control policy, which was adopted by all UN agencies, 31 UN agencies in 2019. And in that common position, all principles of the UN agencies has committed to promote the active involvement and participation of civil society and local communities, including people who use drug, as well as women and young people, into the drug policy discussion. In this context, I think that it is really important event today we are having that to discuss how civil society can engage in the Uppr process, Universal Periodic Report. With that note, I'm just posting the UN common position in the chat room. Please look at the UN common position if you have not seen it before. It also provides the different entry point on thematic related thematic issues, whether it is addressing the arbitrary detention or prohibition of the torture or treatment, harm reduction services, or adequate access to control medicine, All these thematic areas has been identified in this common position, and UN system would like to work with the civil society on this area. So obviously, when you are formulating your someone raised the hand. Okay, going back to when you are formulating your program or strategy for Uppr, I would like to request you to look at the UN common system position, and that could help also for all of us to moving towards a more human rights based approach to drug policy. With that note, I would like to hand over to Jack and then Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zaved, for that great introduction. And yeah, we should be sent around the UN composition and the follow-up email to this call as well, so people can make sure to take a look at it. Very much recommend it. So I want to hand over now to Mohammed Abu Harthia. He's going to be talking about some of the more technical aspects of the UPR excuse me, and talking about his work as a human rights officer in the UPR branch of the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. Mohammed has been a human rights lawyer working at the OHCHR since 2003, has been working as with the Universal Periodic Review as a country coordinator and drafter, preparing the country reports and reviews of many countries since 2010. He has led many missions to investigate human rights and humanitarian law violations and crimes. So Mohammed, whenever you're ready, you can begin sharing your slides, and please begin your presentation.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you actually for inviting us to this meeting. I think thanks also to Zaved, who got the UPR involved in sharing some information with you. I know we are going to squeeze 2 hours presentation into less than 15 minutes. So if there's anything not clear or I went through it very quickly, I hope with the questions and answers we can go back to it and clarify more. So I'm just going to go through quickly, not knowing as we have a big number of participants who have actually a good experience with the UPR and those who maybe could hear about it for the first time. So very quickly, I will go through what is the UPR as a mechanism, and then we will focus more on what is the role of civil society at large in engaging with the UPR and what you could, as an international network for this subject matter of people using drugs could benefit from that mechanism, and how you could efficiently and effectively make use of it to enhance your objectives and the goals of your clients. So without further ado, I would like just to start by saying that although the Universal Periodic Review was created at the same time when the Human Rights Council in 2006 was created following the dissolving of the Commission for Human Rights, it became, after less than, I would say, 15, 16 years, a standalone mechanism. So it is very much related to the Human Rights Council as one of its mechanisms, but you would see later on that this mechanism is unique because it is actually creating, I would say, an opportunity for states, for stakeholders to engage independently from the Human Rights Council agenda at some occasions. So for those who would first time hear about it, the working group of the Universal Periodic Review meets 3 times a year. Each time we review 14 states, and now we have finished the 3rd cycle, so we are going through the 4th cycle. Saying this, it means that it's relatively new mechanism compared to treaty bodies mechanisms. And of course, this mechanism was created based on 3 reports. And the main report, as usual in every mechanism at the UN, it is what member states submit to us, which is called the national report. The national report is usually what the state makes an assessment to itself of how it is actually committed to the structure of promoting and protecting human rights, the policies and strategies that they developed to ensure that they fulfill their obligations. And of course, they can share sometimes the successes or good practices in addition to areas where we would call it like challenges and obstacles into fulfilling those rights. The national report is a process. So later on, I will be explaining more how you could also get involved with this national report, because we don't call it a government report. We actually call it a national report, which means it's a state report. So this is one of the differences between reports submitted by governments and this report as seen as a national report. The second report is called the UN Compilation. And in this one, there's also a role for NGOs to play, although it focuses more on input from UN entities, input from different UN mechanisms. Any public and official report of the UN could form part of this compilation. The third one is the summary of stakeholders. And the summary of stakeholders, we didn't call it summary of NGOs submissions, because stakeholders for us, it is a broad definition where it includes regional organizations. It includes all networks that would be established for the sole purpose of making submissions. Anyone who would make an interest more than, I would say, 2 to 3 persons could be called a stakeholder. And I think interruption in the voice. So stakeholders report is not a shadow report, just for you to remember this from the beginning. In other mechanisms of the UN, we call them parallel reports, shadow reports, but as you could see in this slide, summary report forms actually one of the 3 parts of the whole review of states. So it is a genuine part, it is an original part, it's not a shadow report. The cycle of every UPR is actually starts with the national process, then the review itself, and then, of course, between the review and the adoption, there is some issues that we will tell you about it. And the last thing is consideration of the report at the Human Rights Council. So who drafts the national report? The national report is for the state, but of course, there are ministries, there are many of the structures such as national institutions. There are also other bodies that the state creates. So it is a broad consultation together with relevant stakeholders. And as I mentioned, stakeholders could mean also the United Nations entities and civil society at large. And they are the ones who present usually orally in writing these national reports. There is a guideline that we have developed through the resolution 5.1 of the council. And these guidelines are just very general, but we always support that with much more, I would say, guidelines that we suggest to states. If they use it, they could make a better report, where a link at the end of this presentation, you will find it in the slides. So the submissions that in an interest for you is the ones of civil society, because as you could see, in the past, only those who have the ECOSOC status could make submissions to the UN. But with the UPR, any civil society organization can make its own submission. They can do it as either jointly or they can do it as individual submissions. There is just a little small differences, which is the size of the report, which I will tell you about it. So when you come to the summary and the compilation, actually it is something for us to do, but it shows that we have 2 reports to prepare. So one of them actually states C, which is the compilation, as more reliable, which is the UN entities information, because they think this data have been cleared, it went through different processes. And the one they always complain about and criticize is the one with the summary of stakeholders, because sometimes they see that we involve information which comes with heavy criticism to the state human rights record. But our role is to ensure that any report we use is based on a criteria that we have developed in the UPR branch, which also involves some of the issues that I will come to it later, to ensure that your submissions are considered admissible. And the moment they are considered admissible, it means we have clarified the data and the information that was provided to us, and we have used it in of course, full confidence that it was a first-hand information or information that is reliable and from a reliable source. So during the review itself, what you could usually see is that the same members of the Human Rights Council, who are the 47 members of the Human Rights Council, sit this time as a working group. So they are the same missions, they are the same countries, they are the same states, the same representatives, but the status they use is the working group status. And later, when they adopt the report, actually it's the same countries, but they sit as members of the Human Rights Council. Every review takes 3.5 hours. And of course, there is something that we have decided since the second cycle, that every review after would focus on accepted recommendations and the developments on the ground. There is a role for a Troika, which is 3 member states who assist us always in preparing the reports of the working group. And also just to remember that there is always a live webcast, which is one of the things that I will come through it at the end, is what you could benefit from having a live webcast when you actually lobbying for the working group review itself, the session itself, the interactive dialogue, but also you to make sure that your issues have been raised and you can use it in your advancement and lobbying for your causes. So in very quick way, there is also an adoption session, which is only 30 minutes, and actually we present at that time the report, but usually after the second cycle, we only adopt at the working group session the section of the recommendations and conclusions, because the other part within 48 hours is very, very difficult to prepare and submit. But in 2 weeks' time, full report will be prepared by the Secretariat of the UPR. So I think. Okay. So later in the post session, you would find that states have to take a position, clear position to the recommendations, either by supporting them, which means enjoy the support of the state, accept it, or they can note them. Some states use different words, sometimes rejected, not accepted, but for us in OSCHR, we only consider the word accepted or noted whenever it comes to also indexing the position of the states in the human rights indexing of the United Nations. So the adoption session is very important for you, because that's when NGOs and civil society can engage directly with the UPR after they made the submission, after they have seen that their contribution went through the stakeholder summary report. Now it's time for them to be inside the room and make a presentation, which usually allows 10 NGOs as an average to make interventions. Usually it's about 2 minutes, because if we have 20 minutes and we give each NGO about 2 minutes, then it means we can have 10. But if there is an NHRI, National Human Rights Institution, with the status A, usually they take 2 minutes from your time. So at this plenary, it's good that you raise your voices inside the room with the Human Rights Council. Usually it is called under item 6, which is when the Human Rights Council meets, usually 3-4 months after the review of the interactive dialogue, which is the working group, when states have at that time to give the final word about their position to all the recommendations that were made to them. So if there were any pending recommendations that they haven't given their position, then it is time for them to say this verbally, or usually it comes in an addendum, which is a written short report submitted 10 days at least before the council meeting. So implementation is always the responsibility of states, but NGOs always have a chance to intervene in the implementation, because also states have a responsibility to disseminate information, to draft an implementation plan, to monitor the implementation. There is a lot of responsibility on states to ensure that when they come to the second review, to the review after that in 4 years' time, they have shown and proven that all the recommendations were accepted, have been implemented in full, unless there are challenges that they have to prove that challenges and obstacles were impossible to avoid, and that was what hindered the full implementation of these recommendations. We always advise states to submit midterm report. It is voluntary, but many states have been doing it regularly. It allows them not only to be transparent and improve accountability, but also it's a way if they need any technical assistance, or if they want to engage with other stakeholders. The website of the UPR, for each country, you would have information on all issues. I think I will have a link at the end that would lead everybody to the country that they are concerned about. And from that experience of the third cycle, they can learn what they can do for the fourth cycle. So I just have few minutes, I think, left for us. But going through what you could do practically, which I think the questions later on would allow me to go into these slides in further details, is that you could always, before the review, have consultations, prepare networks, engage with the government, check the draft national report and see if you could have any input in that, bring awareness about the whole process, and prepare your own submission, whether individually or collectively. Before the review, it's very, very important, and I would just tell you, if you want to see that your issues are raised during the review, you have to engage and liaise with UN country teams, UN agencies on the ground. You have to engage with anyone who is interested in your topic, mainly diplomatic missions, because usually at the national level, diplomatic missions raise in their memos to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs any issues raised by civil society to ensure that your advocacy with those permanent missions reach to headquarters, to member states, and then they are reflected in their statements and, of course, in the recommendations or advanced questions they could make. So during the review, at the adoption, you can participate as observers. You can organize live webcasts, as I said before, because it's important to make sure that government representatives, members of parliament, civil society, other civil society, the media, would also know that there's an event. Their country have been reviewed for 3 hours and a half. These are the issues raised by member states. This was their responses to these questions and these comments and concerns of member states. And of course, you can always have side events. Between the review, try to see some countries, with 6 languages or 7 languages of the UN, there are still languages on countries that need to have the reports translated, at least the recommendations which were accepted to be translated into national languages. And of course, you can advocate with the government on some of the recommendations to be accepted and not be noted. Especially when states take the recommendations with them to be examined, I think there's a big role where civil society could look at the recommendations of their concern and try to make pressure on states to accept these recommendations to ensure that they have time to implement them in the future and advance the rights of those people. And if they are noted, also this is an alert, and this is an, I would say, a sign that there is an issue of lack of fulfillment and protection of human rights, which could raise questions of the intentions of the state to ensure that they are implementing their commitment as member states of the United Nations. We have zero tolerance to any reprisals, intimidations, or any attacks on civil society when they engage with UN mechanism. And especially if they engage with the UPR, there were cases before, we know about it. We know that many NGOs are also scared of intimidation. There are many reprisals against some of them, but through time, we at least ensured that the number and the cases are reduced a lot, because with the Secretary General policy, with our interventions before, during, and after any case of reprisals or fear of reprisals, we have intervened and we have ensured that states respect fully the role of NGOs in the UPR. Because as I said, the role of NGOs in the UPR is not a side role. It is an integral role of the whole process. So any attack on civil society, it's an attack on the UPR, which they still states consider it since the beginning as the jewel of the crown. So if it's their jewel of the crown, and we appreciate that states have taken UPR seriously. They have advanced human rights through this mechanism. It's not a perfect mechanism, but it has been proven that it has improved human rights on the ground in many countries. Many issues have been advanced through the UPR, and we hope they will continue to consider this mechanism seriously as it is. Now it comes to the implementation phase. Some NGOs who have the power and the influence and the resources to advance even recommendations accepted, they usually assist states. There's no harm of civil society supporting member states in implementing the recommendations if they can. They can disseminate the report widely. They can also use the High Commissioner letter, which always comes at the end of each review, where we send it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of that state. So they can use these SC letters and the annexes, which we attach to it, where we cluster the recommendations thematically into also advancing the advocacy, the awareness about these obligations and commitments of states. Some states even make voluntary pledges, so you can use these voluntary pledges also to advance your cause. So we encourage also governments to engage with stakeholders when they submit their report or their midterm report to ensure that civil society have also supported the outcome of this report, and it gives more credibility to it. So I would just say that we have developed substantive guidance for stakeholders, NHRIs, parliamentarians, and member states. So if you look at the one concerning civil society, you would find that we have developed one which is an important one for you to mainly focus on prioritizing first-hand information, having credible and reliable sources. Since the second UPR, we focus on your monitoring of implementation of recommendations. It's not about your organization, this submission and advocacy for your own organization, but on the goals of your organization supporting human rights. So you have a chance to report on all human rights, whether it's civil, political, economic, social, cultural, even a humanitarian law during conflict, refugees law, or international criminal law. So you have a chance with the UPR different than treaty bodies, different than other mechanisms where it is specialized or thematic or focused on one treaty. Here it's open for all issues that we consider are human rights issues. So it is very, very broad, which allows any topic, including your topic, which is people using drugs, I think, to lobby for the right to health, right to education, non-discrimination, the issue of criminal justice. There are many areas I would think about when it comes to your network and what they can benefit from having the ability and possibility to report on all issues related to drug using. So the important thing is that do not copy recommendations from other treaties or research sources, and plus make sure that you have no abusive language. And if you want to make also submissions, try to make them in a language that we use, especially English, French, and Spanish, although Arabic is also welcome. But we want to ensure that your submissions, when they are published, as they will be always public, that these reports can be read by a high number of people, all member states, and ensure that they can use them before the review to make advanced questions, to use them when they formulate the recommendation, and they can use them when they lobby member states under review. So try to make highlights on development since the last review, positive or negative developments, direct and indirect impact, and of course, if the state have improved human rights where there's positive things, we also would like to see that there is good interaction between civil society and member states, and we can always also appreciate the advancement and the work of governments in improving their involvement and engagement on human rights issues. So I think time would not allow to go into more details on how to monitor and how to report on these recommendations, but make sure that you at least have researching on each recommendation or each set of recommendations in any thematic area and see what states have done in the last 4 years, what they haven't done, what are the challenges, what can be lessons learned, what are the practices, and then make a submission. Make sure for the next submission that you submitted before the 14th of July. And of course, if it's individual submission, there's a word limit, 2,860 words. If it's a joint submission, 5,630, and encourage more joint submissions than individual submissions, because it also shows more credibility to the information provided, and it will be much more specialized. So these are the main resources that we developed for you, and I hope that this presentation will be shared informally with all of you. It is not an official UN presentation, but it's used as part of this presentation. So happy to answer any questions, and I stop here. Back to you, Jay.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. That was very great and comprehensive presentation. And just to let everyone know, we will be sending those slides out after the meeting to follow up with everything that was presented here as well. And there were just a couple of questions that were addressed in the chat that I would like to pose right now and just pause for a second before we move on to other speakers, because I think they were particularly relevant to what Mohammed and Zaved have just spoken on. The first was a couple of questions from Aidana on how to view upcoming schedules for and deadlines for submitting reports, and if there's open information about which NGOs and which years submitted shadow reports. And I think Anton, thank you for posting the 2 links to the OHCHR website where people can find that information. I guess I just want to pose that to Mohammed, if there is anywhere online that people should go to, or if they're looking for information on where to view previous shadow reports submitted or previous state recommendations, and just view the upcoming cycle.
Well, I think I said this is not called shadow report.
Yeah, yes.
This is a genuine, considered 1/3 of the review. It's a report that we consider as part of the UPR process as a whole. So that's number 1. Number 2, I think it's very important question. I just want to show you on the website, for example, just very quickly, I will go here. When you see it, just tell me if you have seen the screen. Have you seen my screen? No.
I do not see it right now, no.
Okay, just then maybe I should just something else.
If it's easier, we can just put the link in the chat too, if it's not already in there.
Okay, just now. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes, now we can see it.
Excellent. So for example, I'm going to one country, which is Sudan, and here is all the information that you need to know about the 3rd cycle of Sudan, for example. But you see here in the middle, there is very small, like an end note or footnote numbers, number 1, 2, and 3. Many people miss these small numbers, but let me just click on number 3, which is the summary of stakeholders information. And you will see that all the submissions that have been made so far and used by our colleagues or the person who drafted it are here. So for example, these are the joint submissions. So there was like 25 joint submissions, and these are the individual submissions. So let me say, like, if I want to see what Human Rights Watch wrote to us, so I click on, so here is Human Rights Watch. So there's nothing called confidential reports. So any report that you send to us and you have any information that we consider dangerous or something, we'll bring it to your attention. But the moment we send a submission and we use it, it will become public. So that's something also you have to keep in mind. The second thing I would like to show you is that when you go to civil society engagement here, you would find all the technical guidelines here. And at the end, for example, this session, it's already the deadline passed. We started drafting these countries, okay? So Bahrain, Ecuador, Tunisia, there's no way now that one of the colleagues would accept a late submission after 2 months. But the second one is actually 14th of July. So there is enough time. And these are the countries that we are going to draft. So if anyone have an interest in one of those countries, you can start from now either preparing joint submission with other NGOs, with other society. You can start preparing your individual submission, but start also engaging with member states in your country, diplomatic missions, to advance your issue. Start engaging with the UN entities, because when I said before, you click on this one, I just want to show you also another thing. If you click here, you would find who have made also specific submissions to the UPR of a country. So on this one, for example, Sudan, there was no submission from any UN entity. Although if you go to the compilation here of Sudan, you would find that we have used enough information from treaty bodies, special procedures, the other UN entities, ILO and others. So it does not mean there's no submission, we don't have information, but if you have approached UN entities, then you can ensure that they will make a submission, and that's when we will be able to make sure that you have, with your advocacy, convinced one of those entities to bring to our attention, to the working group, to the member states during the review, your issues. There are many issues maybe are indirectly linked to your objectives. For example, the issue of death penalty. Many states, we have raised the issue. I'm, for example, just now, maybe you have seen Bahrain report on the screen. The death penalty applies to crime of drugs, which is not one of the most serious crimes that we consider that states, if they have not abolished death penalty, can use. So sometimes it comes indirectly, but if there is a submission which says directly we recommend removing, for example, the crime of drugs from the list of punishment with death penalty, that makes us more focused on your issues. If it comes to stigmatization and criminalization, if it comes with stereotype, if it comes with the right to health, if it comes with denial of any of the rights because of people who use drugs, then it will appear not only in our report of the summary of stakeholders, it might appear in the national report, it might appear into the compilation, it might come up during the working group session as advanced questions, or as sometimes specific directly linked recommendations to the review. So think about it on what you could do with others who are indirectly linked to your objectives. And sometimes if you have specific concerns, specific issues that you want to raise, then an individual or joint submission is very important. When it comes to civil society engagement, as I told you, there is this technical guide. I think it's very, very useful to use it. And it explains by details. Of course, you can see good practices from other submissions where I showed you. Just go through it, look at them, and then use your own common sense of which one you prefer that yours would look like, as long as you make recommendations that are clear, as we call them, smart recommendations that could be picked up by member states. I think I would stop here unless there are people who need more details.
I think that's perfect. Thank you so much, Mohammed. And I'll be sure to send all these links out with a description of what they are to everyone in the follow-up email too. But yes, thank you very much. Important to go over that, understand where everything is accessible. So I want to go ahead and move us on to our other speakers now and be respectful of their time. I know we have some other questions that were submitted, but if I've written them down, and if folks can just hold off on those until we get through the rest of our speakers to be sure that we have time for everyone to finish their full presentations. But there are some good questions that we'll make sure to get to them at the end. So at this stage, I want to go ahead and welcome Vishnu Sharma, our next speaker, who is the CEO of Recovering Nepal, as many of you will know, is a drug user-led network in Nepal. Vishnu and Recovering Nepal have actually engaged in the UPR process as a network of people who use drugs a couple of years ago, and he is going to be presenting on his work there and the outcomes of that advocacy work, and giving some just best advice and recommendations for the community as people are considering to engage with this process as well. So Vishnu, whenever you are ready, I will go ahead and start sharing your slides, and you can unmute yourself and give your presentation.
Yeah, can I? Let me check.
Sharing your slides right now. There you go. You should be able to see them now.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for me this platform, and it's my pleasure to be part of this webinar. And I would like to thank for the whole the process and this issue in a different forum. We try to bring in a front and a discussion, and especially for the drug users community. I'm from Nepal. This is our first experience in a UPR review process and a NGO submission process. So basically, Recovering Nepal is drug users network and network of drug-led drug service organization. Next. So I don't want to go this slide. So Nepal is a very small country in between India and China, and this used to be a very peaceful country before, but now the political situation is completely not favorable to the people, ups and down. Next. Here I would like to put my attention because how we engage in our UPR submission. In 2019, we came to know that Nepal going to be UPR review process, and this was around Nepal was also the review process, and with the help of IDPC initiated this idea that whether we can engage in a UPR review process, and there are many other non-government organizations. They were preparing for the UPR review process, and we try to link them and try to communicate with them. We started our dialogue with them. But later on, we came to know the issues of drug addiction, the issues of women who use drugs was not that prioritized agenda for the other NGO submission. And frequently, twice, we had a meeting, but although they said maybe we may not include the whole issues of drug addiction, then we decided, okay, now we have to take our own initiation for the submission. And I would like to thank for the Hamduxan International who helped us, to prepare a plan, how we're going to submit our submission. Then in 2019, we formed a small task force, and all the thematic networks of civil society and some few service provider working on harm reduction and care and support as well. So we formed, and after that we the key TOR we set up how we going to work. So we try to identify the key area of and we review the guideline, the UPR guideline, how we can submit this. So we identify our key area of see how we're going to report. So the policy legislation environment, and especially the human right and health right issues was burning in our country, because the current drug control act is criminalized the possession of drug use. There is no any room, whether the drug users are arrested by police, they directly go to the custody and to the jail. So this was the situation. Other area, we try to stigma, discrimination, and the physical, mental and physical torture in a service setting. And that was also time and again, the issue has been raised, a lot of media coverage. And we also identified as a network, national network, and we come across many reported, and this area. The other area, we try to focus on equity. That's a gender issues, women who use drugs. The number of women who use drugs are not that much, but according to the national estimation, around 10 to 12% women who use drugs in Nepal. But the multiple problem they have, so we need to address this. So same time, the other police harassment and the police detention, this issue, the key issues were identified, and the main problem was that it was easy to write in a statement, but it was very difficult to generate the evidence, because UPR guideline, they said, if we writing something, if we trying to statement something, and we need to have evidence. So according to plan, we said, okay, we will first form a task team, and a task team frequently we meet, see our progress, and same time we will have a national consultation and the validation our findings, validation our draft report. So we will have a focus group discussion, and same time we will sit with the government entities, direct entities, and other supporting allies like UNS, UNODC, National Aid Center. So we informed them we are working on this. So unfortunately, last UPR, according to plan, we could not work that much because of the COVID situation we had to face same time, and we had to wait whether how long it goes. And finally, the submission time was in March 2000. In March, but later on we came to know it was a little bit postponed, and we can submit later on as well. So it was first experience, and it was difficult. We hire a technical person for the report, and we hired the in-country technical person who can vigorously coordinate with the women, especially for the women group. And we tasked him, we initiate gathering evidence, the human right violation, the torture, the service, the people have died, service setting, this kind of evidence we try to gather. And finally, with help of technical support from IDPC, and same time we were working on regularly. We were in touch with input as well. So this is the plan that we developed, and it was our really for me. I was as a leader. I was leading whole process voluntarily in this group. So I was also excited, the UPR submission, we can do this. And finally, in 2000, in July, we submitted, and the submission was made. But the core thing is, that we had to work. And then we had to work with identify our key allies around the world, who can speak on behalf of our submission. That was another area we need to work hard. So then we again we developed our plan of action, and according to plan, and it was very difficult because that time we approached different embassies in Nepal, but due to the COVID, we could not have a face-to-face meeting except UN agency. And fortunately, even Home Right Council, there was a focal person who were taking care of Nepal chapter, and we could have a virtual meeting. And we had a meeting with virtual meeting with a different agency, different embassies who were responsible for the human right issues. It was a wonderful experience from our side, and that was a challenging part because unless and until we don't influence our submission, who could speak on behalf of our recommendation, on behalf of our top issues. That was a challenging part, but somehow we achieved this. So next. So these are the consortium partners. We come together. There are the youth group, the women, working group, Recovering Nepal women, this women network with drugs. There are some service provider, and the key agency actively working in this country especially for the people who use drugs. So jointly we submitted. That's the joint initiative. That's what is this experience, and it was a group platform for us, to show working for the good cause, working for the future betterment, for our especially putting on a center people who use drugs and for their health and human rights issues. Next. These are the I already identify national consultation, international expert, task force meeting, force group discussion that we had, national consultation. We plan to have a physical consultation. It would have been more wonderful, but we had a virtual consultation due to the COVID, and we had a data validation workshop and meeting with key stakeholders, and finally we finalize our submission. Next.
Cool. About a minute left, Vishnu.
Yeah, the key highlights and finding straight in submission, promoting respect of the right to the right of life, right to life. Originally, we try to bring the issues regional aspect as well, especially in South Asia. decides the people who use drugs have been left behind by outcome of outdated legislation. The current legislation is the main barriers for the protecting the rights of the people, health right and human rights. So criminalizing drug use and addiction violated human rights. It's not that we are not claiming so drug use should be fully legalized, and we claiming in a position of drug use should be decriminalized. So this because the drug users are not criminal. It is state is the many evidence, scientific evidence, and the international treaties also acknowledge that addiction is not crime. So they still are the country, the Nepal, the Drug Control Act says drug use is a still crime. So because of that, the current report 2 months back, the Control Bureau, even the same situation during that time as well, there's around 28% the people in prison are related to drug dependence. So this is the many drug users are just because of they use drug and they have to be in prison, so it is not a human right, treating human right aspect. So the other big issue, ill treatment, it is repeatedly happening and repeatedly reported in our country. So many people are tortured and people have been beaten inside the physical violence, and they arrested, detained, and the people have died. So this another issue, people are just because of using drug, people have to be face different difficulties, physical, mentally, even up to the days. So drug treatment rehabilitation, it is not run by government, but it is run by private sector, especially the NGO. So due to the lack of monitoring, due to the lack of support from the government side, so unmanageable treatment setting. So there are a lot of torture people are, drug users are facing. So this is the main issues. And decriminalization, access to health service. So this is although we have a harm reduction program, we have a OST program with support of drug policy and drug strategy in this country. But unless and until we don't revisit our, and we realize, according to the commitment, international commitment from our state, not able to translate the legislation once they already committed. So this issue we wanted to more highlight in our submission. And the woman, issues of women, so next.
We could have some closing thoughts so we can make sure we move on to our next speaker soon.
Yeah, next. So recommendation, the clear recommendation we said, the death penalty, issues of death penalty have been, there are a lot of voice in our South Asian region, but we wanted to try to focus on death penalty. It's not a solution. And the main problem, I already said, the Control Act 2023, and we said government has already, the Nepal already received 3 or 4 constitution in this country, but we have a same law about 2076. We have been practicing this outdated the Control Act, and we need to revisit, and we try to ensure rights of the people who use drugs and decriminalize possession of who use drugs. So these are the key recommendations we that make. Next. So the key issues we try to recommendation, we try to at least the international, there are many international guidelines. There is the government has also come up with the drug treatment guideline, but there is no monitoring system. There is no proper regulation, and the people have facing difficulties, and people have facing that the torture that we try to highlight, and we call upon the government to revisit these issues. And the expand harm reduction drug treatment harm reduction program in the country, across the country, because this is the first time service, the services the people who drugs should receive, and without discriminatory approach. This is this and other the issues, the women issues had to be addressed separately, because they have a multiple problem than male who use drugs. So discriminatory approach and police harassment should be stopped. This kind of recommendation this statement we made. The next. Next slide. So finally, we received High Commission letter to Nepal, and there are annexes also quoted for the area of improvement, area of given, and that which is very excited to us. At least we High Commission. I've seen this kind of letter first time. Although I have been. We have been working in this as an activist. We have been working for a long time, and a little bit discouraged, the submission, the recommendation, the area we try to indicate that was not cover or spell out in a High Commission letter. So that was a little bit discouraged part, but the area, the health right, the human right, and the issues of torture has been covered. And we have now plan of action. We, according to High Commission later, we have already made a plan of action, and we are working on it. The next.
Okay, they will have to.
Yeah, small presentation video that have been submitted. I would like to go on.
We can make sure we set this video out for everyone to watch in the post-meeting material. It's unfortunate. I don't think we're going to have time to. But yeah, wonderful. I mean, thank you so much, Bishnu. I think that's a lot of really useful information from you as a community member. Talk about the timeline and how you proceed with all of this, and we'll be sure to send this entire presentation out to everyone in the video as well with the letters, because I think it's all very useful for people to go ahead and review. I'm just noting the time right now, and I want to be able to give Ajeng sufficient time to speak. So I want to thank you, Bishnu, for your presentation. We'll be sure to get to any questions people have for you after Ajeng has given the opportunity to give her presentation. So I want to share the screen. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our final speaker, Ajeng Larasati, the Human Rights Lead for Harm Reduction International. Ajeng is as a human rights and public health specialist with 12 years of experience in program management, organizational development, and strategic advocacy. And she'll be speaking about some of her experience with the UPR and giving some recommendations for the community as well. And I will pull up your slides right now.
Thank you so much, Jake. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks again, Input and Jake, for having me here. While Jake is working on the slide, an introduction. My name is Ajeng Larasati. I'm originally from Indonesia. I'm the human rights lead at Harm Reduction International. So some of the things that I would mention is also based on my experience in doing some UPR advocacy in Indonesia on drug policy issues. Is the slide on, Jake? I think it's not yet.
I'm so sorry. I thought I was sharing it.
Don't worry. Cool. So for those of you who might not know HRI, we are an international non-government organization working to reduce the negative health, social, and legal impact of drug use and drug policy. There are 4 teams under HRI. We have the sustainable financing team who leads the work in tracking and advocating for sustainable funding for harm reductions, public health team, my team, which is the human rights team, and we also have a conference team. And I'll talk a little bit about the conference a bit later on my presentation. Next slide, please. I think we can probably skip this one because Mohammed has mentioned about this and talk about this in detail. That's very helpful. Next. Next again. Next. I guess Jake can help share the presentations with you all. So you can also have a look at things that I will not present, that I not speak on at this moment. But the main questions that Jake asked me to talk about is why UPR matters, basically. And there are a lot of reasons why I think personally and professionally think UPR matters, but I'll share some of them with you now. Apart from being arguably one of the most effective ways in advocating human rights issues due to its non-confrontational and frame it as a peer review process, there are several reasons why it matters. First of all is UPR reviews all human rights topics. And this is something that Mohammed has mentioned as well. We can include a wide range of issues, basically, especially issues that are often overlooked, such as like HIV or harm reduction, or issues that are that other treaty bodies have not picked up yet. And acceptance of recommendations on this issue has led to action taken by countries because they must implement the recommendations that they adopted. I use quotation for the word must because if I'm not mistaken, Mohammed can correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, there is no legal obligations, but it's more like, because this is like a cyclic review, countries will be asked about how they implement the last recommendations from the last UPR cycle. So they will have a sense of obligations to implement basically the recommendations that they accepted. For example, following the UPR, the government of Indonesia has introduced several regulations and guidelines on HIV-related awareness, raising and education, and in promotion of sexual and reproductive health services. Second reason why it matters is that it can drive a policy change in the country. For example, South Korea, they finally criminalized marital rape after having accepted the recommendations in this sense. Next slide, please. Third reason is that the holistic process of UPR could also facilitate a coalition building among civil society. Bishnu's presentation has show how important it is to collaborate with other organizations working in the same issue, but also maybe expand our coalition, our collaboration with organizations or civil society that works on like a general human rights issues. This is particularly important because for our sectors, I feel like there are not so many organizations in the country working on drug policy issues, but there are a lot of organizations working on human rights. So engaging with them and be part, like facilitate a coalition building with them would be very important, not just for the sake of the UPR advocacy, but also for the for future advocacy works in the country, but also in the regional and international fora. Fourth reason is that UPR can be used as an angle to engage in dialogue with government and other stakeholders. I've heard lots of civil society organizations working on drug policy. One of the challenge is talking with the government because they just like usually ignore them or like block them and don't want to have a conversation. But frame a conversation with the government as a continuation or like a monitoring or follow-up of the UPR recommendations, for example, would be a good angle. And it is based on my experience, country would be more open and welcoming if we use the UPR as the entry points or like key points for our discussion. And lastly, for sure, all of the things that I have mentioned before, it will help in raising awareness on issues related on drug policy and human rights, and once again continue to position drug policy as a human rights and health issues. Next slide, please. So there are 3 stages of the UPR cycles, and I guess this has also been mentioned by Mohammed. So probably we can skip this one and go to the recommendations. Previous one, sorry, Jake. So almost one of, I wouldn't guarantee if you do all of these things, then it will be a successful advocacy. But based on my experience, when we do these things, it helps in making the chance, making a greater chance of a successful advocacy, basically. And there are opportunities for civil society to engage at every stage of the review, from submitting report, advocating for acceptance, as well as advising the planning and implementation process. The first thing that I think is very important and my main recommendations is to plan ahead. As we can see from Bishnu's presentation, like he clearly set out how he, what are the steps that he needs, that the coalition needs to do in order to take part in the UPR processes. This could also mean familiarize yourself with the deadlines, try to find as much information on what steps is required for each stage, for example, and identify potential or probably existing human rights coalition or organizations in the country that we can be part of. And then prepare well, I need to correct this one. Prepare a report, a submission, not a shadow report, as Mohammed has pointed out. Prepare a report basically, and we can choose either to submit it ourselves or to collaborate with other organizations. And it is all depends on the country context. It depends on how much resources, human resources especially, but also financial resources you have. It also depends on whether or not, like if your organizations have the data that you will need in order to develop a good submission, basically. As in many other advocacy works, there is always some benefits and costs of collaboration work. It might take more time for collaboration work, for example. So think about it carefully. Then in the report, craft the recommendations carefully. Ideally, it has to be smart recommendations, meaning that it must be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. For example, try to stay away from generic recommendations such as improve the quality life of people who use drugs, and instead create a recommendation, something like expand the coverage of harm reduction in prison, like a more specific and easier to measure. And before the actual review, usually there will be a pre-sessional briefings where we can talk and add more updates basically on the issue that we submitted on our submission. The other recommendations is also to reach out to friendly states, which is the embassy in your country. As Mohammed explained, member states will give recommendations to the state under review. The national report, the UN compilations, the summary of stakeholder submissions, it will all be used to inform member states to make recommendations. But I personally found it very helpful to reach out to the friendly states in your country and brief them about your submissions. Reach out to them, set up a meeting, and just tell them about the submission you made for the UPR, and tell them about your recommendations. Try to influence them to pick up your recommendations. I guess the way that states make recommendations might be different with one another, but my understanding is that the most common way is that recommendations is made by headquarters with input from the embassy in the state under review. So if you are in, for example, Nepal, try to reach out to the UK government, I don't know, Netherlands government, for Netherlands embassy, for example, in Nepal. Talk about the submissions, influence them to use the recommendations that you provided. And then they will give such inputs to the headquarters, and it could be part of the recommendations that they give to our country. And that would be, I think for me, that is one step of a successful advocacy. And last thing is, I guess, to keep monitoring and follow up the result from the UPR and use it as an input for the next cycle. Next, please. This is the SMART recommendations that I talk about. You can, I think, read it in details later. And lastly, next, please. I just want to mention that if you have any experience or lesson learned in engaging with UPR or other UN human rights mechanism, don't forget to submit an abstract to our next International Harm Reduction Conference. Registration will be open next week, as well as the abstract submission. I think that's all from me for now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ajeng. A lot of really useful information there around why UPR is useful and why it's important for human rights, all the opportunities that are present for engaging with it. And I'll be sure to send all of your slides to everyone in the meeting, because I think there were some other things to read from that. So that will be great to go over. So I want to be cognizant of the fact that we are just about at our time that we had planned for the call today. And I apologize for going over here a little bit, but we do have a couple of questions I want to make sure to get to, as well as a few hands raised I'd see. If I want to also be respectful of our speakers' time and everyone else's time here too. So if you do have to leave at 30 past the hour, that is perfectly okay. But if everyone is comfortable with staying for an extra 10 minutes just to answer some of these questions, that would be fantastic as well. We'll try to get through as many as we can in that time. But I want to kind of go back to some of the questions that were submitted in the chat earlier in the meeting. And there were two that I think are related, which I would like to ask together to any of the speakers to address. But a question from Anton was, given that UPR recommendations to countries have only recommendational status, are there any sanctions for countries for not implementation of recommendations and measures to make them implement recommendations from the UPR cycle? And then a related question from Adana was, what are some successful cases in countries where the recommendations of UN committees regarding people who use drugs were actually implemented by the states? And what are the instruments of influence on states that do not comply with the recommendations of the UN committees? So if any of the speakers have something that maybe want to offer in terms of how these recommendations are binding and how states are upheld to them, if there are any successful examples of such, that would be great to hear. Oh, someone trying to.
Mohammed, you need to open your microphone. You're muted.
Yeah, I was looking for on this platform where I could put my hand, and I couldn't see it on my small screen. So, well, I think no one would have an answer for this big $1 million question if there are sanctions. States have not complied sometimes with something more serious, and there was no serious sanctions. It all depends. I think the UPR is a peer review, and if we look at it so far, 3 cycles, it's between bilateral and multilateral, I would say, commitments. States make recommendations to each other. So if, for example, Nepal made a recommendation to the UK, I think Nepal should ensure that the UK have implemented the recommendation, because that's what we expect the report, the national report of the UK would show. If UK have made, for example, also a recommendation to Nepal, then the UK can also put this in their foreign policy, in the programs that they have together. It's part of international relations, and ensure that it's part of, for example, the support they give. It's part of the sanctions they give. But also, if you look at it legally speaking, when the Council adopts the review of any states, and there was no objection from anyone, it means that we expect states to comply with their own commitments. The last thing I would say, many of these UPR recommendations actually stem from your advocacy, of course, from your work on the ground, but on the other hand, many of them come as part of the legally binding obligations of states through their commitment to treaty bodies. So many of the recommendations, actually, they are repeated in the Committee Against Torture, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, from CEDAW, from CRPD, from different covenants. So usually you would find another place where these recommendations have came from. But as I said, the UPR is a comprehensive mechanism where all the council of the working group can discuss all rights that affect the people on the ground. The enjoyment of all human rights is something that the UPR would look at, when other mechanisms and other committees would look at specific areas. But if you put them together, they become part of the state obligations. So we expect states first, they should have complied before the UPR with their obligations. If they fail to do so, then the UPR is just another complementary mechanism of, in some places, it's a reminder. So see this as a complementary mechanism, and then see also how states could also, because although there is some similarity between the word UPR and PR, many states use the UPR as a PR, and they want to have a good image. I'm not talking about the negative part of using it as public relations, but as a PR, they want to have a good image. So we have seen that states have made big effort to introduce in their report sometimes the challenges and obstacles that would prove to member states who have made recommendations that they have made effort, but there were some issues that they couldn't implement. And sometimes they say they already implemented, but then civil society and other stakeholders will come back and say, sorry, they have not implemented them. So that's when I think Vishnu mentioned the issue of proof. We're not a criminal, justice procedure or a court. But on the other hand, I think reliable and credible information on the ground can prove always whether states have implemented or not. So there are structural issues that states can easily prove that they have implemented if they were asked to ratify a treaty, pass a law, adopt a policy or a strategy or a plan of action, establish institutions. Then these are issues that are necessary, but they cannot show impact on the lives of the people on the ground. But when it comes to processes, also they can prove they have made effort, and there were some issues that they could say they have done through the way by making sure that they monitor prisons, they have a justice system that have for example, took action, end impunity, improve health system, and so on. And then there are issues also that they can prove by indicators, humanized indicators, that they have actually implemented them by showing the percentage of implementation and how it impacted the lives of the people on the ground. So these three areas of indicators are something that we measure. And states, as I told you, engage with the UN every single day. So ambassadors, when they come and meet with the High Commissioner, when we have any policy engagement, when we have any treaties, we go back to the UPR recommendations and use them as a mirror and assessment of states' compliance with human rights. So if you hear that there is a technical cooperation, if you hear about opening an office, if you hear about an idea of a special rapporteur, so these are, I think, the measures, the only measures that we could take when we know that states have not fulfilled or complied with their obligations, and the UPR is one of the sources that we use in this regard. I hope this answered a little bit your question about how states comply with their commitments when they accept recommendations. But on the last thing I would say, it's you on the ground who could ensure that states fulfill their commitment. It's you who would just bring to the attention of government if you are satisfied or not. I think change comes from the ground and not from here only.
So, Jack, I would like to add on this. The experience from Nepal, when we submitted UPR and the whole discussion was in Nepal, I was also part of consultation, national UPR, the team as well. The national submission, the government was submitting the report. I was part of it. Finally, it was a big debate, and the recommendation that we made, finally Ministry of Home Affairs in Nepal, they come together. They had, and now finally they come up with the action plan, 5-year action plan, and they are now clearly stated that the legislation change. They made a plan of action. By next year, they will change the Drug Control Act, and they will start drafting the Drug Control Act. And there is a clear indication that come up with their plan. They will expand harm reduction program throughout the country, including OST. This kind of pressure, the submission made little bit, pressure to the government, revise policy, legislation according to the international commitment and the voices from the civil society, why we are working on it, why we are making our statement. So this is also a good example, we are excited, at least the government acknowledge and they have come up with a plan and we have to work on this.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Vishnu, for that perspective. I think this is a really key question. I hope that, and thank you from Ahmed too, for your very detailed answer. I think always important to know the various dynamics in which these recommendations are implemented and what they complement ultimately as well. So I want to give the sort of one final question from Ranjit. I see you've had your hand raised for a bit of time. I want to acknowledge too that Surjit, who had to drop off the call, asked a question that I will address in the follow-up email, which I think is also addressed in some of our presentations here about where this.
We lost your voice, Jake.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I want to move on to the final question, Surjit. I will follow up in the email about the points that people who use drugs should be concerned about regarding the right to health and UPR. But so Ranjit, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the final question, please go ahead. You just need to unmute yourself if you have.
Ranjit, you are muted.
Yep. Ranjit?
No, it's okay. Didn't I already explain what I want to know? It's fine. I got an answer from Vishnu, brother.
Right. Cool.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, yeah, like I said, I don't want to keep everyone for long, and I want to be aware of everyone's time commitments. So I think we can go ahead and just wrap it up here with some closing thoughts. And again, I will address some of the other questions from Sergi in the follow-up emails and everyone's presentations. So I just want to thank everyone again for participating today. And for our speakers, especially for making time to talk to us. This is obviously a lot of new information for a lot of people in our community, but I think that it's a really exciting opportunity to get engaged in a very unique form of global advocacy and a very key human rights mechanism. So Input is actually working on a technical brief right now on the UPR for the community, which we'll certainly be sharing shortly when it is finished in June. And we'll be following up with more information about when you can expect your country to be coming up for review and helping networks that want to get involved in this through every step in the process. We look forward to talking to you more about the UPR and engaging in this moving forward. And yeah, I think that's just about it. So thank you all again for showing up, and thank you again to our interpreters for your work as well. Kim and Gaia behind the scenes. I hope everyone else has a great rest of your day, and yeah, pleasant week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.